What is going on to all my Barry blockheads out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again, breaking down this second to last episode of Barry, episode 7, titled Candy Asses, an episode in which we see Sally's career seems to be over. We have the Masterclass of Jim beginning. Both the Raven and Nohank have been captured, and Barry just can't seem to die. We'll be discussing that and so much more in today's spoiler review. But before we get into the discussion, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you're checking me out on all my other social media accounts. If you're new to the channel and love early movie reviews, TV breakdowns, and live streams, well, come and join the community by subscribing and hitting that notification bell. And if you all enjoyed this spoiler discussion of Barry Season 3, Episode 7, well, make sure you like the review as well as share it. But more importantly, share your thoughts on the 7th episode, which wasn't too much fun stuff going on. Very dark, but also excellent direction by Bill Hader. Let me know your thoughts on the story, the narrative, the incredible shots, and of course, your thoughts and theories of what we can expect to see in next week's finale. Let's talk about all that in the comments below. But before we get into this discussion of all the stuff that went down in the 7th episode, I want to take the time to thank every single one of you all that joined me in last night's live stream watch party. We had such a good time watching the episode live, having some reactions, discussing it, breaking it down, coming up with theories for next week. It was so much fun. And again, I'll thank every single one of you all that tuned in and also watched the replay. We're going to run it back. We will be running it back next week. Another watch party for episode 8, the season 3 finale. I want to invite you all to join us because it's a fun time. I always talk to people about the show and it's just like, oh yeah, I've heard of it, I don't watch it. Well, if you are one of those people that love the show and your friends and family don't watch it, you have a community to watch it with come next week. So starting at 8:45 p.m. Central Time, we'll be pre-gaming, coming up with some theories, having a good time. We're going to watch the episode together live and then break it down once it ends. So I invite you all to join us 8:45 p.m. Central Time for next week's watch party for the finale. Information on that will be in the description of this video. With all that being said, we got the 7th episode to talk about. Full spoilers ahead as we open the episode with meeting Ryan's dad. I believe his name is George. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But we see George attending church, and you can clearly see that there's something on George's mind. He is battling and struggling with this eternal conflict, which I think it's safe to say. The conflict at hand is he knows the location of who he believes is the responsible person for taking his son Ryan's life away, but also he's battling with the idea of taking his own life to see his son again. Now, we'll talk about George a little bit later in this breakdown, but let's transition over to Barry, aka Michael Myers, who is seamlessly dying right in front of us, and Sharon can't bear to look at his face as she throws a towel on his face. And it's important to note, Sharon's still out there. She is loose on the run. I mean, she seamlessly is, she killed Barry. At least she thinks she's killed Barry. So where is she going? Is she going to go to Fuches? Does she have a plan B? Is she going to go on the road? Where's her son? Will we see her next week or in season 4? So much to look forward to, and we'll be talking about that promo for episode 8 that we got in the end of this episode. Was it Sharon that we see maybe burying that ditch, or maybe it's Barry burying that for her? I guess we'll find out next week. But let me know what you all thought of that opening, and we'll talk about Barry resurrecting, which I don't think it's a coincidence that if we're assuming that this is taking place, if, again, we saw Ryan's dad, George, at church, assuming that it's Sunday, it's very biblical that Barry has risen from the dead on a Sunday. It might be a bit of a stretch there, but we'll be talking about Barry a little bit later in this breakdown. But let's check in with our main man, Gene, whose master class has begun. We see him cutting a promo for the class, and it's just, I talked about it last week, and I talked about it in last night's live stream. It's so great to see him back in the acting class, because that's some of my favorite moments of season 1, seeing the actors coming together. Some of the funniest bits came from that. Some of the more serious moments came from that. So it was really kind of great. And I said it too last night that it almost seems like the show is kind of almost rebooting itself, maybe because its lead character won't be around too much longer, but seeing him square one acting class, and I think we're going to get our characters like Sally, whose career has ended. She'll probably be attending this class sooner rather than later. But let me know if you all are excited for this master class, because we might get some cameos from some actors, some up-and-coming actors, or some actors who've canceled their career, making their way, start from scratch in this class. Let's have that discussion. But getting back into what's going on with Annie in this episode, who is not not having the most confidence in herself. She's having a panic attack. She doesn't have the confidence in what she's doing, but because it's been 20 years since she's directed something, which we all know that's because of what Gene did to her, kind of blackballing her in Hollywood. But it was great to kind of see her regaining her confidence and having the PA saying, no, you're doing a pretty good job. So much so that we see that she gets hired for another job. And I'm really kind of excited to see what we get with the Annie character, and also tying that back to Gene, that he is being a man of his word. He's trying to make amends for his past, which we've been talking about it for the last 7 weeks. That is such a central theme of this season. The name of episode 1, Forgiving Jeff. This is a season about forgiveness and trying to make amends for your past. So I love that we still kind of get that narrative, and Gene's making amends and trying to do the right thing, which, speaking of Gene doing the maybe not right thing, Jim Moss pays him a visit at the Masterclass, and we see that Jim is a pretty straightforward guy. He cuts straight to the chase and say, listen, I just turned in the guy that said that he knew who killed my daughter, and he brought up Barry, who was in your class. Do you have anything to say to me about what's going on with Barry? And to my surprise, and we're going to talk about this here, I did not expect Gene to lie for Barry. Now, we see him say, Barry's a good guy. No way he killed your daughter. But let's really break this down. Did he lie for Barry for number one? Because number one, he's protecting himself. Because if he says, yeah, he did kill your daughter. Well, hey, you've been sitting on this information. Well, you could be a corporate to this. Maybe you were involved in the murder, so we can see his career fall right in front of him. So he doesn't want to risk that opportunity or risk that chance of losing his career because he knew what Barry did. So there's that kind of selfish aspect that he's kind of keeping that secret to protect Barry. Then there's a second angle that he really does want to protect Barry in this weird type of way. There is this kind of father-son relationship. He knows Barry kind of went down this wrong path. He, of course, still has this type of resentment to what he did to Janice, but he can kind of maybe somewhat understand, especially since he's had a dark past. He doesn't kill anyone that we know of, but he's done some messed up stuff, and he kind of maybe see himself in Barry. I don't know which way I'm leaning towards. I think I'm leaning more towards him protecting himself, him protecting his career that he's been chasing for the last 30 years. Let me know, why did Gene protect Barry? Let's have those conversations in the comments. But speaking of Barry, let's talk about Sally, who just ended her career in this very episode. We see her going through the motions in regards to this Medusa show and the showrunners giving their notes. And she speaks up and says, you know what? I don't think this fits into the narrative, this, that, and the other. And we see the other cast members and other production people being like, you know what? We were right there with you. We don't understand why this guy is putting this in the show. And it seems like, again, she's kind of finding her voice in the Hollywood landscape. Unfortunately, she gets caught in a detour. As she's walking down the hallway, she looks into a room and is no other than her ex-assistant, Natalie, who, I gotta say, things are moving kind of quickly, because how the heck did Natalie get a show so quickly? Like, how did she get into that room? How does she go from being an assistant to now her own showrunner? I don't, some off-screen development there, but it's Hollywood, baby. Things happen like this sometimes. I mean, we saw that with Sally's career, right? But we see her, she's a showrunner. She's pitching her show. People are laughing and crying and having a good old time, except for Sally. Let's talk about this very awkward elevator scene that we got here. So we see the moment between Natalie, who at this point has her own version of herself. She has her own assistant, and she has a conversation with Sally. And we see Sally confronts her about her new show, which was titled Just Desserts. Sally pours all her jealousy and anger towards Natalie. And at first, I didn't notice it on the first watch, but you can clearly see Natalie holding her phone right in front of her as we see Sally, you cancel yourself. And it's just so funny, as you all can see on the screen now. Doesn't this scene look so familiar to what Barry did to Sally earlier? So it is very interesting to see the role reversal of how Barry was yelling at her, being very, just in public, didn't care. And it was so funny to see Katie bring up, like, is there anything that could be done with this type of verbal abuse? And like people in Hollywood saying, no, there's really nothing we can do. Well, Natalie has found something. You get him on camera and you catch him on 4K. That's how you you're getting canceled. And of course, Barry's career isn't anywhere near close to what Sally had going on. So she had a lot more to lose than Barry did. But it is just so interesting to see how she just lost everything just like that, from being jealous, being upset, and, canceling herself because, again, she was caught in 4K. So what a big moment there. And I just love the parallels of seeing the differential of what Barry did to her and how, in some type of way, I'm not condoning, because I didn't condone what Barry did, to her, and I'm not condoning what, Sally's doing to Natalie. But there is a little bit of just like that battle that she's been going with everything that she had going with her life, and lying about what happened when her relationship with Sam, not really confronting Barry of how he acted towards her, and her just kind of letting all this out. And there might be something to be said about what the show writers are saying of how Sally, she really never confronted Sam. She really never confronted Barry. I mean, she broke up with him, but she really didn't tell him like how emotionally that wrecked her and kind of brought her back to that moment. But then in this moment, she's kind of built the confidence and the courage to yelling at Natalie. And it's almost like I wonder if she really does view her as someone lower than her, someone that's less than her. And that's how she's able to like finally vent and tell her true emotions. There's so much to really dive into that psyche of why Sally felt comfortable in doing that. But let's have some discussions about all that in the comments. But getting back into the conversation, Lindsay calls Sally and shows her the video, which is out in the public, of her raging out in this situation. And we see that she loses her Medusa gig. And against the conversation she had with Lindsay and doesn't take her advice, we see that she makes this terrible video and just trying to make excuses of what she did. And ultimately, we see her yet again in front of her agent, or I should say ex-agent now, Lindsay. She tells her, you know what, I would rather be unhireable to work with you, to work in Hollywood. And what I loved about this scene, and I'm going to bring this up on the screen now, look at the parallels of season 2 Barry walking into darkness, and we see this scene here with Sally seamlessly doing the same thing, kind of the darkness and the shadow being behind her. So it begs the question, will she embrace the darkness? Will she, and we talked about in the live stream, can we see her putting a hit on Natalie and maybe hiring someone to do it, like her ex-boyfriend Barry? I don't know if she's going to get that dark. I don't know if she's going to maybe try to do her own vengeance in her own way and go down that dark path. Again, if I go back to my parallels of like retracing season 1, maybe we're going to see her embracing that dark side and doing something to Natalie. I don't know, but I think that's no coincidence that they have that dark shadow, that presence behind her. Let me know if we're going to be seeing her go into the dark side. Let's have some conversations about Sally canceling herself, ending her career, and what next. I think she might be joining that Masterclass and have Gene, who is someone that he had to rebuild his reputation in Hollywood. Maybe she's going to go back to her master and visit the Masterclass. Let's talk about Sally in the comments below. But let's check in on what's going on with Nohank, who is on his Bolivian rescue mission in this episode. We see my boy Hank in the streets literally calling out the name of Cristobal as he stumbles across this man who he is just like, hey, do you know where I can find Cristobal? And we see him just being like, drugs? Oh, yeah. And he's building his little dart and this was probably one of 2 jokes in this episode. He's like, oh, I thought you were doing that, but I didn't want to judge you. He shoots him in the neck with the dart. We see, and I had to put in my notes, no one puts baby in the corner, but he is captured in this moment as Hank is speaking to his men, and they give him the advice that he's going to break himself loose, and when he does, be ready. So are we going to get like an action sequence? We all know last season 2 had an incredible action moment where Barry was taking out all the men. Are we going to get a similar scene with Hank and his men just shooting out all the Bolivians in this all-out war? I know one thing. Hank better not get hurt next week. That's all I know. Let me know your thoughts and theories on what you all hope to see in this Bolivian rescue mission. Will he save Cristobal, or will he see him die right in front of him? Let's have those discussions in the comments. But let's check in on what's going on with Fuches, a.k.a. the Raven, as he meets with Mr. Moss. And we see them on this car ride. And this was a very important scene because we see Moss telling a story about his time in Nam, how he got captured, but he managed to escape because he was able to convince his captor to take his own life. That might be some foreshadowing. I don't know if the show just told us that Jim Moss is going to either talk to Fuches again or maybe talk to Barry and convince them to taking their own life, because he's an expert at this. Let me know your thoughts on that theory there. As we see, Fuches doesn't believe this story. He thinks it was just a coincidence that based on that person's job in Nam, that it made sense that they would take their own life, only to realize that he's been taken to the police and the Raven has returned. Let's talk about this moment here. As we see, Moss tells Albert about Fuches telling him about Barry, and he learned that Gene was the one that was involved with Barry, which hints back to that scene that we talked about earlier in the episode, or this breakdown here. But then Albert's like, wait a minute. Barry is brought up yet again. He's starting to put the pieces to the puzzle together. And another funny moment as he tells the police officers, turn the cameras off. And the one police guy says, do you want me to give you a phone book and a handful of a coin or socks full of coins, kind of old school, beating the information out of your criminal. I thought that was pretty funny. But we're going to tie back to that scene when we wrap it up. But let's check in with Michael Myers, Barry, who is alive. And again, did she not fall through? Did she knowingly not put enough poison to killing Barry? Or again, she just her first time killing someone, so obviously she made a mistake. But neither here nor there, Barry is risen. He wakes up, he chokes on, his saliva. He wakes up, walks out of Sharon's place, and let me tell y'all right now, the direction of Bill Hader is absolutely fantastic. That transition of him walking on the streets and him hallucinating, because obviously he's cutting in and out between almost dying and being alive and having this poison still in the system. That transition of him walking on the streets and how it becomes the beach, one of the coolest transitions I've seen in this entire show. Again, Bill Hader's direction is absolutely flawless in these episodes. As we see Michael Myers walking to the beach of his past victims, we see this car approaching, and it happens to be George, who finds him. And I think it's safe to assume Barry was just instinctively, he was walking back to his apartment, because how else would George find him in the wide streets of California? So I think, again, Barry, that was his apartment. I think, again, the conflict of George in his episode, he was going to Barry's house to do the deed of killing him and still struggling with that. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was Barry's alley, his garbage can, his dumpster, his apartment, and George was going there to do the deed of killing him, which we see how that all shakes out. But before we do, again, let me know, did George go to his apartment? That's how he was able to find Barry. Let's get back to the conversation. Barry now in the car. They arrive to the hospital. George pulls out a gun. And again, remember the conflict. I can take his life. I can end this. And by doing that, I might have some type of closure. I can maybe have the opportunity to see my son again. Getting back to the conversation, George goes into the story of how he just wants to hurt someone who was responsible for the death of his son, and he has that person in his very car. Again, thinking that Barry was responsible for Ryan's death. We all know as an audience, Barry didn't kill Ryan. That was the one person he didn't kill. We know that was the Chechens that killed him. But again, he's under that assumption that he can kill him. He can just let him rot in the car. He can't do it. He's a good guy. He just can't kill this person. But more importantly, he just wants to see his son again. But before he ultimately makes a decision, we cut to Barry in this dreamlike sequence with this, I want to call it the beach of death. And we see all his past characters that he has taken their lives, from Gorman to Chris to Fernando, Esther, even the Chechen killer who loved Barry. And we even see Jeff. So again, I'm assuming that this was an afterlife. Barry was kind of in between life or death, and we see Barry and his victims. Now again, let's play out the scene. We see like the afterlife, and I assume this is like them transitioning to the afterlife. But Barry wakes up. He's now in the hospital. We see, unfortunately, George did take his life. In his way, this was his way of seeing his son again. He couldn't take a life. He only took his own life. But let's rewind and talk about that dream like inception sequence. I found it odd rewatching the episode. We saw Esther, we saw all the other characters, again, even Jeff from season 1, but we didn't see all the characters that Barry, like that beach would have been filled with bodies, right? Even the season finale, season 2, would have been more bodies. I'm assuming the reason we didn't see, in particularly one character that I was like sure we were going to see, was Janice. And not seeing Janice, I think, is purposeful, because I think there are certain victims that Barry has either just forgotten about because it was just like, a paid job. And also, especially when he killed all those people in season 2, like he was just popping people. He didn't really see their faces. So it makes sense that not all of them would have been there. But then then I started to think about it, but what about like characters like Taylor? Why didn't we see him in the dream sequence again? Janice. So again, to me, some of those more personal deaths, maybe he's tried to like bury in the subconscious, but then I thought Chris was there, and that was someone that was very close to him. So again, I don't know if it's just a matter of if it was intentional that we didn't see a Janice, that we didn't see other characters, or if it was just like a scheduling thing, like they couldn't get the actors to come back in that scene. I think it might be a mixture of both. Let me know how you all felt about not seeing all his victims, and particularly the more important ones like Janice, if it was purposeful or if it was just a simple, scheduling issue that they couldn't get all the actors there for that day. Let me know your thoughts on all that. And again, metaphorically speaking, how you all felt about that death sequence of him. And again, it was so beautifully shot. It was just such a huge metaphor, and I've been talking about it from the beginning of the show, the forgiveness angle, and him just the past catching up to Barry. And again, he's the bad guy of this show. I think we sometimes forget that, but I thought the way that scene played out was so beautiful. Let me know your thoughts on all that as we see that Barry gets to live another day, and we'll talk about my theories in a little bit. But let's wrap up the episode as Albert cuts straight to the point with Fuches and tells him that the cameras are off. Albert goes into a story about what happened to the scar on his face as Fuches realizes who he actually is. And then we see Fuches goes into the story about Barry and how they know each other, but more specifically what Barry did to Chris. And he cuts deep and he brings Chris' family into the story, and we see how he mentions that Barry has this effed up life as Fuches ends the episode with how the mission went wrong and that Barry at the end of the day is a good guy. You see Albert tells the police they can do whatever they want with him. He heads back to his desk, he grabs his gun, and off he goes. And I love how the beaches of the waves are playing, the sound of the beach is playing in the background, which to me maybe foreshadows someone's going to end up on that beach come next week. Is it Barry himself? Is it Albert? Is it Fuches? Is it someone else? I guess we'll have to wait till next week. But what a great way to end the episode. Again, we're assuming that he's going to look for Barry, and he's got his gun to take Barry out. I think there's a little bit more to that story, whether it be him maybe forgiving Barry or trying to help Barry, or he could try to kill Barry. And again, let's talk about it now. As we saw from the preview, there's someone buried in a ditch. Is it Barry? Is it Fuches? Is it Albert? Is it Sharon? I mean, there's so many people that could be doing that. And I want to give you guys one more little tidbit. I don't know if you all have heard this or saw it on Twitter, but I'm going to put something on the screen now. Check out this little clip that I have for you.
Next. The last episode of the season is incredibly intense. Everybody listening to this, very intense. It's not a lot of jokes in the last episode, and it was to a place where, I like the episode a lot, but it's very, very intense.
So as you can see on the screen now, there's not going to be too many funny moments next week. It's going to be a pretty dark season finale, which is titled Starting Now, which happens to be, again, directed by Bill Hader. And there's just so much to look into. Again, that whole title within itself is a callback to season 1 when Barry said, I'm not going to kill anyone else. And he killed Janice. He's like, okay, starting now. So the starting now means ends now for Barry. Like, is he just going to end his life? Is Jim going to convince him to end his life? I cannot wait to find out. I think we're going to get that confrontation of, again, facing your past. I think Jim will have a conversation with Barry. Maybe Albert comes in, saves Barry. Maybe it's the other way around. We're going to see what plays out in that. What's Fuches, his whole thing going to be into the finale? There's so much to look into. Sally, Masterclass, as they're mowing the lawn. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I am so excited to watch the finale. Again, we're going to watch it together come next Sunday, 8:45 p.m. Central Time, live watch party. I invite you all to join me in the community and having a good time watch the finale. Oh, I cannot wait. Thank you all for watching this breakdown. Hope you enjoyed it. As you can see on the screen now, if you haven't already, make sure to like the review, share the review, leave your thoughts in the comments, and of course, subscribe to the community if you haven't already. Thank you again for watching this breakdown. Come and join the community. Check out my previous Barry reviews. Check out my most recent review, and we'll catch you all on the next breakdown.